The United States of America, often referred to as the land of immigrants due to its rich history of immigration and diverse population. According to the Pew Research Center, by the year 2050, 40% of the US population will be made up of first and second generation immigrants. It's evident that this population will have an incredible impact on its nation's future. Now, we've all heard the incredible stories of first-generation immigrants, of coming to America and of sacrifice. But the stories often untold are those of second generations. And of course it makes sense because our struggles pale in comparison to those of our parents. But it doesn't mean that we shouldn't bring attention to it. The struggles, many of those struggles are related to the generational gap that exists within families and often not spoken about. Today's topic is to acknowledge that, number one, that it exists. Number two, to open up a dialogue around it. And number three, to figure out a way to bridge the gap together. I'm here today to share my journey as a second-generation immigrant and hopefully bring some perspective on how we can move away from stigma and silence to empathy and acceptance. And I hope that in doing so, we can unpack our shared experiences together, pull one another through, and recognize we are not alone. I'm the first in my family to be born a US citizen, and my family escaped the Vietnam War like so many others did. In 1979, they were sponsored to the US, and that's where my life began. And like so many other second-generation immigrants, I was taught to blend in and never lose your culture, sacrifice everything for the greater good of the family, put education as number one, because education equaled money, and money equals success and status. Respect your elders, outwork everyone in the room, never complain, always be humble and grateful. Oh, and also, be the family translator, take care of your younger siblings, and when you're older, you're the retirement plan, so don't screw it up. Does that sound familiar to anyone in this room? I am sure everyone here can relate to it on some level. But from a second-generation immigrant perspective, the fact that our parents sacrificed everything to pioneer a new beginning, it was ingrained into us almost daily that it was not just our duty but our obligation to make that dream come true at all cost, even if the cost was losing ourselves in the process. And over time, those expectations and pressures compound into a slew of mixed emotions. So you can see how the generational gap will continue to grow if we don't address it. Now, I acknowledge that there is a gap between all generations, baby boomers, Gen X, Gen Y, millennials. It's been like this since the beginning of time and will continue to do so. But there are specific nuances within the first and second generation immigrants that I want to bring light to today around language and communication, around culture and identity, and around the definition of success and the American dream. Now, I'll start with the most relatable one, language and communication. Who in this room has communication issues with their parents? Now, I'm sure in the future, one day soon, my kids will be on a stage similar to this, saying the exact same thing about me. But the one thing that they won't be able to say is that it's a language thing. And I take pride in my ability to articulate my thoughts and break down ambiguity and connect with others. I was a journalism major, and even though that's not my profession today, for the past 20 years, engaging with people and building relationships is what I do for a living, but I do it all in English. my Vietnamese is good enough to get by. And my parents' English, well, it's just a little bit better than my Vietnamese. So you can imagine how frustrating it can be to not be able to fully explain yourself to somebody that you love the most. But even if I were 100% fluent, the cultural norms were not there for the vulnerability or the psychological safety or even the open lines of communication that we all learn about today. And on top of that, I have 3 strikes against me. I'm their child, I'm a female, and I'm third in line. So as a child, talking back was not tolerated. And as a female, well, I'm not really expected to have a voice because that's the job of my husband or any other male in the room. And third in line, even if I had a really good idea, the oldest sibling was always right. Now, we were conditioned to believe that this was just the normal way of communicating and that it was not supposed to be challenged. That was until we saw how American society really viewed the traits of a leader, or even how the American family dynamic worked. The more opinionated and outspoken I became, the more praise I got in public. It did not have the same impact at home. I was viewed as disrespectful, disobedient, and needed to be reminded of my place. The more Americanized I became, I grew resentful that I felt like I carried all of these expectations and burdens and never heard a single "I love you" or "I'm proud of you." And to top it off, the expectation was also that I was just supposed to suppress my feelings and move along. Between the language barrier, the conflicting cultural norms, throw in a little teenage angst over time, I lost it. I was frustrated, and then I felt guilty for feeling frustrated because I was taught to always just be grateful, but I wasn't. And for the first time in a long time, I was glad to be number 3. My 2 older sisters, 5 and 7 years older than me, had already gone through this journey, and they shared perspective with me that I didn't have at the time. It was in this conversation that I recognized I wanted my parents so badly to communicate with me like American parents communicated to their American children. I wanted them to be somebody that they weren't. I wanted them to say, "I love you and I'm proud of you." And in focusing so much on what I wanted with complete disregard to who they were, I realized that I missed the opportunity of seeing that they actually did say, "I love you," and that they actually did say, "I'm proud of you." They just said it in a different way. They showed it through food and through putting us first, cooking around the kitchen and saving the best pieces for us even when there wasn't enough to go around. That was "I love you." The act of skimping and saving and never buying a single thing for themselves and always saving it for us, that was "I love you." And the act of always telling us how we could always do better, I thought it was that they were constantly disappointed in me. But I realized that that was their way of saying that "I'm proud of you," because they realized that I could do more and they wanted me to achieve it. Now, I recognize and accept that I will never be able to communicate to my parents the way that my children will be able to communicate to me. And I also recognize that I'll never change them. So bridging the gap here has been about finding that empathy and perspective to really understand why they do the things that they do. But more importantly, what they're trying to convey with their actions and not just their words. And that has definitely helped with our relationship. and that leads us to the topic of culture and identity. Bicultural identity, dual identity, identity crisis, lots of terms to encapsulate the tension that exists when you live between two worlds. The never-ending feeling that you're never enough for either side of the hyphenation. Asian American, what am I? There's a constant negotiation of loyalties, of which loyalty will win out today. Language, religion, cultural norms. In college, I had this great idea. I was going to honor my parents and get more in tune with my identity by exploring a semester abroad in Vietnam. It was going to be great. I had the brochures, I had a plan, I was going to get college credit, be able to practice my Vietnamese, and see the homeland. I was so excited, I came home and I presented it all to my parents. The look on their faces. You would have thought I took a dagger to their heart. With complete and utter disappointment and sadness, they said, "How could you do this? We sacrificed everything to get you to have a college education in America, and you want to go back?" I had no idea that in my attempt to strengthen my identity and get back in touch with my culture, that it would evoke such trauma and such emotion for them. I recognized that when they came and immigrated to the US, one of their goals was not to have to revisit the past. They wanted us to move forward. They wanted us to be Americanized so that we could fit in and have equal opportunity and not be discriminated against. They wanted so much for us that they wanted to put the past behind. As a parent myself, the goal or challenge, I should say now, is how do I preserve that past when my parents don't want to have to revisit that history? How do I instill not just that culture, but also the hardworking, humble immigrant mindset to my children who, quite frankly, have it all? I'm worried that the further and further removed we are from the previous generation, that the culture will be lost. But I'm also aware that in doing so, I have to be extremely careful about which aspects of the past to pull forward, because not everything deserves to be preserved. Stigmas, for example, exist across all cultures, and stigmas are so intertwined with one's identity. One of the main ones across immigrant groups is the stigma of mental health and even abuse. You see, when people are just trying to survive, their options and resources are limited. They don't have any other way out, or they don't know any better. But even when they do, people tolerate it because they don't have any other way. And when they do, they perpetuate the situation because they're so used to tolerating it. They don't believe they deserve any better. They don't want to expose the truth. For us to bridge the gap here, we have to recognize that we need to educate and encourage. We have to remove the stigma. Resources are widely available, and we have to do it differently. To honor our parents, we can't just go back to the past and do things exactly the way that they did. We have to do it differently for ourselves and for the next generation to come. And that leads us to the last topic, the definition of success and the American dream. The dream was always to do better than my parents ever could, to make every sacrifice worthwhile, to carry the family now and long beyond retirement. For the past 42 years, my focus has been around just that, moving quickly through life to just check all the boxes for the family. Go to college, get a degree, get a job, make money, buy a house, get married, have kids, have a side hustle or two so that you can pay for all the things. It's been a way of life. For me, my sisters, my younger brother, many of us in this room. Earlier this year, I was burning the candle on both ends, leaving the house before the kids got up and coming home right before bed. And to make it worse, my husband is equally on the go. My mom, recently retired, came to help us out for a bit, and she observed how we were living. The constant on-the-go schedule coordination, barely having time to have a proper meal. She sat me down and said, "Cindy, when is enough enough?" I was dumbfounded, and then I was resentful. What are you talking about? You raised me to be like this. This is what we've all been working towards as a family. You and Dad always told us to try harder and to seize every opportunity. This was the dream, wasn't it? I was so focused on what I thought my parents' dreams were for the family that I completely lost my ability to dream for myself. They had checked the box on our success long ago, but we were so conditioned to keep pushing forward. We were so conditioned to keep doing more. And this self-inflicted pressure creates a vicious cycle of stress and guilt and resentment. Now, I'm fortunate that my parents have gotten to that point. It's taken them a very long time. And they've done a lot of work on themselves to be open-minded and to accept us with open hearts. And I recognize that not everybody's parents are there. But we're at a pivotal moment in our lives where the dream just isn't about survival anymore. It's also about trying to figure out how to incorporate a life that is well lived, a life that has impact and purpose. To bridge the gap here, we have to define success in a different way. And we have to do it without that added stress and guilt and resentment, and recognize that maybe some balance is okay. And maybe enjoying the ride is part of the dream. Now, they say as immigrant children, you inherit your parents' trauma and their dreams, but that you never truly understand them. It's a way of life, and they have tried very, very hard to get us past this. We have an opportunity to do more. Now, I hope that in sharing my experiences today, it encourages you to open up the dialogue, no matter what generation you're in, no matter what struggles you're going through. We have an opportunity to live life differently. The fact that 40% of the population by 2050 will be made up of first and second generation immigrants, and we're still not having dialogue around the struggles and complexities that face us around language and communication, identity and culture, and the definition of success, it's a problem. We can do more. Imagine what could happen if we could pull each other through this journey faster. How much better your relationships could be. how much more compassion you could have for yourself and others, and how much more of an impact you could make on this world. Now, I don't know what groups are doing it best, but we can start with our own lives and shift from stigma and silence to that of empathy and acceptance. We're all in this together. And while many of you still feel like the only, the research shows you certainly are not. So take a moment and redefine what the dream means to you and for the next generations to come. Thank you.